Welcome back to Morning Joy, where truth matters. I'm your host, Keith Downey, and we're going to be talking about the difference between attachment to sin and committing a sin with Debbie Giorgianni and Adam Blai on The Next Right Thing. Good morning, Debbie and Adam.
Good morning, Keith. Thanks so much for having us. We are the hosts of The Spirit World, heard right here on Guadalupe Radio Network on Saturdays, 10 a.m. Central, 11 a.m. Eastern. And this weekend, we're going to be covering Divine Mercy. But during this whole entire week, we have our friend and guest on, Rick Paolini, getting us prepared for Divine Mercy, the graces of Divine Mercy. But today is our open line day where we open up the phone lines if anybody wants to call in and share how their Easter is going and how you feel about the whole entire Lenten season going into the Easter season, or if you want to talk about how you are getting prepared for Divine Mercy Sunday. And we just got a call and they just dropped. Somebody called real quickly. That was wonderful. So we are going to open up the phone lines, 877-757-9424, if you'd like to share how you are getting prepared for Divine Mercy Sunday. Adam, just a side note, I love the Road to Emmaus. I think it is like a fascinating biblical account, and I think we can learn so much from it.
Mm-hmm. It touches on, in fact, what we're going to talk about today, and that is the attachment to sin. Paul had been committing sins directly killing Christians, and it was in his heart to continue to do so. And really there was a transformation not only in his behavior, but in his heart. And as we're coming up on Divine Mercy Sunday, there's a concept in there that is difficult for a lot of us. It's a little bit subtle, and I think we can make it clear. And it's the critical difference between this washing away by the grace of Divine Mercy Sunday of all of our past sins, including the punishment to them, that doesn't require a complete detachment from sin. And that's different than the plenary indulgences that we're used to, that if we read the details, it says you have to be in a state of grace, you have to go to Mass and have no attachment to sin. And that's really a high bar to attain. And this Sunday, we have an opportunity to not have to reach that high bar, but still get the graces of that forgiveness, including the punishment associated with sin. So let's go ahead, Deb. Go ahead.
Real quickly, let's because our friend Rick Paolini, who will be back tomorrow and Friday to get us fully prepared for this Sunday, stressed several times that this is different from a plenary indulgence. This is the graces of Divine Mercy Sunday as spoken about by Saint Faustina when she had her encounters with Jesus. So very different, and I just want you to state that again for folks, because I think, as Catholics, we're kind of trained on how to participate in indulgences, which, is different from this particular massive, streams of grace this weekend in Divine Mercy.
Right. When we talk about indulgences, we're talking about the church declaring that from the storehouse of graces that Jesus gave the church, that the church is declaring that a particular indulgence is given. This one is Jesus having talked to St. Faustina and telling her that he would provide the grace of this forgiveness, including to the punishment connected with the sins himself. And so it's not that the church is declaring it, it's that we have this private revelation that the church has approved. And so we have a confidence that Jesus is going to do this based on what he told St. Faustina. So it's a different mechanism. Let's really briefly remind ourselves, mortal sin is when we commit a sin that's a grave matter, and that we can understand that as a violation of one of the 10 Commandments. But, number 2, we do it with full knowledge that it's wrong, and then we decide to do it anyway. So those are the 3 aspects of a mortal sin. And what does a mortal sin do? Well, the Catechism says it destroys charity. It destroys love in ourselves, and it is a choice to turn away from God. It's us choosing to turn away from God, and so it's breaking our relationship with God. It's putting the soul in a state of spiritual death, meaning if we were to die at that moment in a state of mortal sin, we would be damned. because we have chosen to reject God and turn away. So again, it's a grave matter. We're violating one of the 10 commandments. We know that it's a grave matter. We know it's a commandment, but we choose to do it anyway. So that's the worst level. That's a mortal sin. You do need to confess those. It's not like you go to Divine Mercy Sunday and you have unconfessed mortal sin. You've done this very grave matter, and you're going to say, well, Jesus will take care of it.
Right.
Those you do need to confess. Okay. Venial sin, we've heard this word a lot. This is a lesser sin. It's not following the moral law, but in a less serious matter. So things like being prideful, things like white lies, things like being very selfish and seeking out, just pleasures for yourself in life at the expense of others and neglecting others. Just basically being very selfish in various ways, but it's not rising to the level of a violation of one of the commandments. Okay, so venial sins, basically they don't break your friendship with God, your relationship with God, but they wound charity in your heart. The more selfish and callous you become, the less charity is in your heart, and the less likely you are to avoid mortal sin, and less likely you are to do good for others and be charitable and loving. Okay, so again, mortal sin, gotta confess it. Venial sin doesn't rise to the level that it has to be confessed, and it's washed away during the Mass by the Confiteor in the Mass, when everybody says together, repenting of their sins together. And go ahead, Deb.
Right, and other parts of the Mass as well.
Yeah,
right.
I believe it's 3 times, I think.
We've covered that in the past.
Yeah, we've covered that in the past. So those are washed away by Mass. But okay, so let's get to the subtle point. We hear this idea of attachment to sin. When we're seeking a plenary indulgence, we'll read the rules and it'll say you went to confession and you don't have any attachment to sin. Well, what does that mean? We can kind of simplify it and say it's a desire for sin in your heart. Now let's take it even simpler. Imagine that we want to steal somebody's purse or their wallet, but there's a police officer, in the group here, in the crowd. So I'm not doing it because I see there's a cop over there, and they're going to see me, and they're going to catch me, and I'm going to get arrested, and I'm going to be punished. So I'm going to hold back. I'm not going to grab the purse or the wallet because the police are watching, and I'll get punished. And so I'm not doing it I'm not avoiding it because it's wrong. I'm avoiding it because I'm going to get punished. And as soon as the cop leaves, I'm going to do the crime, and I know it. I'm just waiting. That's what an attachment to sin is. It's a desire to do the sin. We don't care that it disappoints God, and we're not avoiding it because it's wrong. We want to do it, but we're avoiding it because of the punishment associated with it. So when we think of sin, we may avoid doing it because we know it's a mortal sin if we do it, so we're gritting our teeth and resisting it, but we're only doing that for selfish reasons because we're avoiding punishment. We actually want to do it, and that's an attachment to sin.
Well, and this is why we've stressed this many times on the spirit world, that you have to come up with a plan to distance yourself from these thoughts and feelings of a future, path or to continue in sin. You have to get a plan out of it. You can't just say, okay, I'm stopping today, I'm not going to steal anymore, but yet a week down the road those feelings come back, and now you have this desire or this, and you're plotting it in your head. That is so dangerous. That's why we say to folks, please get a support system around you with help from counselors or coaches or spiritual directors to get a plan out of this, committing the sin over and over again, even in your mind.
Yeah, exactly. And we know this from psychology. We know this from drug and alcohol recovery. If we roll these ideas around in our mind and we fantasize about doing these things, the desires get bigger. They take on more strength within us. If we're going into situations where we see the sin going on, or it's very available to us, it increases the temptation to do it. So we know we need to avoid those things just from a psychological level. There's a lot of things you can do. And by the way, just to remind everybody, this is very scriptural. When we remember when Jesus said, the law says don't commit adultery. But then he says, but I'm telling you that if you look at a woman with lust in your heart, you've already committed adultery. So Jesus calls us to go beyond just the law and resisting the behaviors of the sin. He's saying, I want your heart to be more pure and more godlike, as opposed to merely resisting the behavior. So,
and your mind to be in the right disposition, the right attitude, because we can, you're right about this authority. If somebody of authority is standing by, it will prevent us from doing something because we don't want to get in trouble. That's a natural tendency, right? But to have our minds be pure, to have our hearts be pure, that's really the goal.
yeah, and to get to the point where it wouldn't even enter our mind to commit that sin. There's no inclination to do it. It doesn't even come up as an option in our mind. That would be the goal, and that would be living, a saintly life in that moment. And so all this is to explain that this Divine Mercy Sunday, and I believe this is out of the entire year, this is your one opportunity that you can go and receive the grace from Jesus to be free from all your previous sins, confessed or not, through your whole life, and the punishment attached to them. Even if you still have an attachment to sin, meaning you haven't made that progress in spiritual direction or in your own life, deep down that you still covet these sins, you're still drawn to them. Maybe even you actively want to do them, but you're only gritting your teeth and resisting it. Even if you're still struggling with attachment to sin, you can receive the grace this Sunday. And that's why Divine Mercy Sunday is very different than a plenary indulgence.
Yeah, see, that's very important, and we need to stress that. And I know that Rick Paolini tomorrow and Friday is going to give us the step-by-steps, but the reason why we're focusing the whole week on this is because it gives you time to prepare to go to confession. So we really wanted to do it ahead of time earlier in the week so that you could look at the churches and see who has confession times. Because I will tell you that some churches are taking a few days off after Easter Sunday. And so you want to make sure that you check the bulletins and online to make sure you can get to confession before Divine Mercy Sunday. But Adam, just to bring this down a little bit for all of us. So plenary indulgence, different criteria, different requirements. This particular Divine Mercy Sunday, this is just a very big, immense form of grace for all of us so that we can literally wipe the slate clean from all the sins, the effects of sin, everything, to really get a fresh, complete start. But there's certain things we need to do. We need to ask for those graces. Rick Paolini is going to talk about that more. We need to ask for those graces. We need to be in the right frame of mind going into Divine Mercy Sunday. Go to Mass, go to confession, be in a really receptive place for those graces to get inside of us and really transform us so that we can take this beyond Divine Mercy Sunday. So it's not just like a get out of jail free card and then we go on with our life again, right, Adam?
Yeah, and I think one of the other points was that we have to trust in the mercy of Jesus that he has promised us related to this, and I think Dave will go over that.
Rick, yeah.
I'm sorry, Rick. Sorry. There's two aspects of sin I just wanted to touch on super briefly, and then maybe if Keith had some thoughts on what we've been saying. And these are kind of slightly additional points that I have noticed through, helping to train exorcists now for, and now approaching 20 years.
Wow.
I have seen a lot of, and talked with a lot of people and kind of, kind of a minor version of spiritual direction in terms of, being a contact person between sessions and trying to talk people through their struggles as they're in the process of getting freed. And this is what I've noticed about how the enemy works in terms of temptation and forgiveness. Number one, I think part of why the attachment to sin is such an important thing to work on is that I've noticed that the enemy tends to tempt us and push us towards sins that we have already fallen to in the past. So there's kind of a downward spiral of sin that they're going to pursue, in my experience at least, getting us to sin in ways they've seen us fall to before, because they know just as psychology knows, the best predictor of your behavior is your past behavior. This is just a truism that we know from psychology.
Right.
Yeah, and so they've seen us fall to it before, and they know what worked to get us there, to tip us over the edge and get us to fall before. And so as a person is getting freed from their grip in these extraordinary ways, possession's very rare, super rare thing, don't get anxious about it, but it allows us to see the gears working more plainly as opposed to inferring them. We see it more explicitly because the demon is talking and doing these things. They're going to go after us in the places that we're weak, the weak spots, our inclination to sin, and they're going to try to put those on a silver platter in front of us and inspire us to do those again. And that's why working on the attachment to sin, where's the desire for the sin coming from? Where's the spring from which it flows within us is so important, because that's our weak spot and that's what they're going to keep pushing on, if that makes sense.
Oh, absolutely. We talk about it all the time in life coaching. Actually, like if somebody has this drive or this desire to go to the bar on Sundays or something like that and just sit there all day and watch sports and drink, right? They'll say to us, well, I worked all week and I just want to relax. And so we will say to them, you got to do the next right thing is you do the more difficult thing. And they say, what's the more difficult thing? Go to adoration, go back to church. Go back to church. And they look at us and they say, what do you mean I want to relax? Go back to church. Do that, do something very different from what you normally would be drawn into doing, because it helps you elevate out of that desire just to give into all of our feelings, emotions, passions, and so you're spot on about that. We talk about that all the time on life coaching. But real quickly, before we only have a few more minutes because we have to make room for Cecil Anderson. She's going to talk about the fruits of the Spirit. Keith, is this the first time you've heard of this amazing Divine Mercy Sunday and the graces that are attached to it?
Well, I would say it's the first time someone's really gone in detail and explained the what and the why, which I think is very important today because, we can get very distracted. I know I'm the first one to admit my distractions, especially when it comes to doing novenas. I always say I'm the worst at novenas, especially the one-day novenas. I seem to always fail at those. So it's nice, and thank you, Adam, for breaking down the difference between mortal sin and venial sin. I feel like even though the description and definition of those have been around us for a very long time, a lot of people still are struggling with the differences and, trying to figure out what they need to do in order to go to confession. So that's been very helpful even for myself. But I do have a question when it comes to the novena itself, and maybe there's someone just listening in now, maybe has no idea about the requirements. Now you just mentioned, making sure we're avoiding attachment to sin, but is the Divine Mercy Chaplet also a requirement within the novena?
No, it's not my understanding that that's a requirement for this grace or this forgiveness on Sunday. My understanding, at least, is that
that is true. Go ahead.
Is that all that is needed is you be out of a state of mortal sin, so you go to confession, you confess your mortal sins, and that you go to Mass on Sunday, receive communion, ask Jesus for this grace, and trust in his mercy. That's at least my understanding.
Mine as well. And I actually clarify this with Rick Paolini. He'll be back tomorrow and Friday to give the last minute details. But that's why this is very unique, Keith, because some people said, well, I didn't start the novena on Good Friday, so now I'm out of it. I'm not going to get it for this year. It's not true. That's why we're taking it this whole week up until, and that's why we're covering it on the Spirit World on Saturday to give folks a last minute chance to get to confession, get ready to receive those graces, to trust in Jesus, to let those streams of love and mercy flow over people, to really get them in a great place with God. And that's the reason why we devoted this whole entire week on this, because this is huge. This is a big monumental breakthrough, if you will. And that's why I love Divine Mercy Sunday, because of this. And so that was a very good question. And Adam, you were spot on. I just think it's important that our listeners do take a few minutes to maybe research it on their own online and just make sure they're up to speed so they know what they're entering into this weekend.
Yeah. And a final thing before, I know we're running out of time, but a final thing I wanted to share with everybody is don't forget to work on your forgiveness for others. That's the other side of the coin. We're talking a lot about sin and attachment to sin, our own sins, but sin is a coin with two sides. My sins and other people's sins that have wounded me. And if I hold on to unforgiveness, that gives the enemy some traction in terms of my relationship with them, because they want us to have unforgiveness for other people's sins. And that's another level of this that you can work on in your life. That in my experience, again, helping to train exorcists for all these years, I've seen it very clearly that unforgiveness is almost as much traction as our own holding on to our own sins.
Right.
And so don't get anxious. I'm not saying you're going to become possessed because you have unforgiveness. My point is that that's another aspect to this, where if we hold on to other people's sins, we're still holding on to sin, and we're in relationship with sin, and it's turning our heart bitter, and it just doesn't lead to any good. Now, I'm not saying you should continue, abusive or hurtful relationships that are hurting you, not that, but at least in your heart to forgive the person and pray for them.
Beautiful. Okay, so we believe the next right thing. We're going to keep stressing it. Get to confession. Get ready for Divine Mercy Sunday. Okay, Keith, take it away.
Thank you so much, Debbie and Adam. And I'm just really I'm really excited for Thursday and Friday with Rick Paolini, giving us more of a catechesis on Divine Mercy Sunday. By the way, if you're looking for the novena, please go to EWTN, search Divine Mercy Novena. You could also go to divinemercy.org as well. But yes, coming up next, fruits are for sharing. And I'm not talking about the fruits on your table. We're talking about the fruits of the Holy Spirit on Fruitful Living with Sissel Anderson. We'll see you right after this break.
You're listening to Morning Joy, where truth matters.